is a project that began in the 1970s when Exxon discovered one of the world's largest zinc copper deposits at the headwaters of the Wolf River in northeast Wisconsin, right on the border of Michigan and Wisconsin. It was a mile upstream from Chippewa Reservation at Mole Lake, where the tribe located their reservation next to a wild rice lake, and that is the reason why they situated their reservation at that place. And the problem that they saw in the 1970s was that any discharge from the mine was going to go directly into their wild rice lake and destroy their food supply and their basis of cultural existence. So they asked me to get involved in the 1970s in protecting that from this project. At the time that the project was being proposed, it was being developed by Exxon Minerals, which had recently diversified from an oil company into a mining company. And because Exxon was the main promoter of the project, and everyone assumed that because Exxon had unlimited resources to do the project right, that it was an inevitable project and that it would be done right. The governor supported it, the legislature supported it, the DNR supported it, all the environmental groups in the state supported it. I went to them and asked them, would they help the tribe oppose this mine project? And they said, we'll help you regulate it, we'll help you, get better environment protection, but it's suicide to oppose this project when everyone else is in favor of it. So I said, and then the tribe said, the hell with them, we'll go it alone. And over the course of 28 years, the tribe developed their own technical, financial, organizational resources. They disproved a lot of the pseudoscience and the junk science of the mining corporation, who, contrary to what everyone expected, did not have the best scientific evidence or the best scientists working for them. They had yes men working for them that told the company what they wanted to hear, and all we had to do was hire our own independent hydrogeologist and biologist and aquatic biologist to show that this was going to be a major source of groundwater drawdown, of water contamination, and downstream impacts, because the processing of those sulfide ores, and sulfides, of course, create acid mine drainage, which release heavy metals into the environment. And people downstream on the Wolf River, who had tourist businesses and fishing and rafting operations, joined the Chippewa in their opposition to the mine. And pretty soon we had northeast Wisconsin against the mining project. But we had a town board right next to the reservation, town of Nashville, that was in favor of the mining project, because the company was going to give them hundreds of thousands of dollars in compensation if they agreed to the project before there was any environmental impact statement. The local community objected to the idea of a local agreement before there was any scientific, analysis of what the mine was going to do. The town board ignored the citizens. They met in violation of the open meetings law, in violation of the open records law. They agreed to a local agreement that would give permission for the mine and set the whole thing in motion. The town residents organized to object to the process. They held a town meeting, and before they could voice their opposition, the existing town board dismissed the town meeting and said, this is an illegal meeting. They called the local police and dispersed the people from having a voice in the local agreement. The response of the local community was to join with the Indians. For the first time in the history of northeast Wisconsin, you had an adjacent white community that had historically had antagonistic relations with the local Indian tribe join forces, present a insurgent slate to the town board. They voted out 3 of the 4 town board members that had sold the town to the Exxon Corporation. And the first thing that the town board did when they were elected on an anti-mining platform is that they reneged on the local agreement. They said any action of the previous town board which is in violation of the democratic rights of the citizens we're not going to recognize. And furthermore, they then sued the previous town board for 55 violations of the open meetings law, and after 2 years of litigation, they won their suit, where the town board essentially said they did in fact violate the open meetings law in conducting secret negotiations with the mining company. The final blow to the project occurred in 2001, after 7 years, when the state opposed the right of the tribe to regulate their own water quality under the Clean Water Act. The Supreme Court dismissed all the objections of the state and said that the Environmental Protection Agency, when granting or recognizing the authority of the tribe to regulate its own water quality, set its own water quality standards, had the right essentially to have final say over whether the permit that depended upon discharging wastewater in the tribe's water supply had the final say. The company that was left with the project decided they weren't going to invest in the project anymore. And after another couple of years of negotiations with the company that assumed ownership of the project after Exxon pulled out of the project, negotiated a buyout of the project where the two tribes that were involved, the Mole Lake tribe and the Forest County Potawatomi tribe, bought both the surface rights and the mineral rights for $16.5 million. The value of the ore body, if it was marketed and sold on the world market, was $4 billion. So what the tribes and the opposition had done over a 28-year period was demonstrate to every single mining company, and there were 4 different mining companies that had tried to develop this deposit, that this was a non-viable deposit. They were never going to get a permit to operate this mining project, and therefore the value of the ore body was zero. So all they paid for were the surface rights, and when they purchased the surface rights, the tribe became the owner of the Nicolay Minerals Company, and the first thing they did was they told the state of Wisconsin they are withdrawing their permit to mine. They turned the land into a conservation zone, which is now jointly managed by the Forest County Potawatomi and the Mole Lake tribe, which means that that deposit will never, ever be developed. No mining company is going to come back 5 years when the price of metal goes up and says we're going to revive this project, because the land is now part of a conservation trust. So not only did they defeat the 4 mining companies, but they created a permanent solution to the threat of mining by gaining control of the mineral rights. The third thing they did was that they, in communicating their objections not only to this mine but to the whole technology of sulfide mining, which is an unproven technology. There are no examples anywhere in the world where we can mine in the sulfide ore body without contaminating groundwater or surface water. And of course, the companies all said the exact opposite during the whole controversy. They said, but that's all in the past. We have new modern technologies, and we can do this environmentally safely. So what the opposition said was, fine, you say you can do it safely. Show us where you've done it safely in the past. And that became the basis for the mining moratorium legislation that was passed by the legislature in Wisconsin in 1998, which said that the state of Wisconsin cannot grant a mining permit to any applicant in a sulfide ore body, and most of the geology in northern Wisconsin is a sulfide deposit, unless they can show where a mining company in the United States or Canada has mined in a sulfide ore body without contaminating groundwater or surface water. They couldn't do that during the debate, and they haven't done it since the debate in 1998. No company in the world has been able to get a permit from the state of Wisconsin for a sulfide mining operation because they cannot show where that has been done safely in the past. This has become known as Wisconsin's Prove It First legislation. There are people in Michigan and Minnesota that are trying to get that legislation passed similar to the legislation modeled on the state of Wisconsin. In El Salvador today, you have an effective moratorium on gold mining, which is a variant of sulfide mining, arguing the same thing, that until the industry can show that they can mine in a sulfide ore body without contaminating the water supply, they will not be eligible for a permit in El Salvador. And El Salvador is now on the verge of passing a total ban on all metallic mining because of the fragility of the water supply in El Salvador. And all that is based upon the Wisconsin mining moratorium experience.
How does that apply to the Pinocchio Hills thing that's going on?
The Pinocchio Hills understood that they could not get a permit under the mining moratorium law, and so they wrote a law which said that an iron ore body was different from a sulfide ore body, despite the fact that there are sulfide minerals in the Pinocchio deposit. And in the legislation known as Act 1, passed by the legislature in 2013, the legislation says that iron mining is different from sulfide mining, and furthermore, that all iron mining is exempt from the mining moratorium law.
Really?
Yeah.
And where was the DNR in all this? Because you hear the DNR saying, we got this sand mine thing pretty well covered. You don't worry about it too much.
The DNR was caught in the middle between the environmental tribal opposition and the mining companies. One of the things that we understood is that if the DNR was left to its own devices, they would side with the mining company. They would accept all this junk science. And so when the tribes got involved in the process, particularly after 1988, when they were allowed to have their own casinos, they used the proceeds from their casinos to hire expert scientists that sat in on the meetings between the DNR and the mining company when the proposal for the mining company was being developed. And because those independent scientists were looking over the shoulders of the DNR regulators, the DNR was forced to go back to the company and say that these computer models that you have submitted to us as proof that there won't be any environmental impacts are not based upon science. They're not based upon actual calibration of the groundwater flows in these areas. They're based upon these theoretical models which say that there are going to be no impacts to the groundwater and the surface water. And because of that, the company had to keep going back and submitting new computer models to make their findings more legitimate in the eyes of the regulators. But in the process of doing that, the cost of the project escalated, and by the time that the mining moratorium law passed in 1998, Exxon said that that this is too much, that this is an investment which we're never going to see a return on. They pulled out of the project, and that was sort of the beginning of the end of the project, because the company that was left after Exxon pulled out was a Canadian company that didn't have the capital that Exxon had to pursue all these changes in the mine plan.
Yeah, Al, do we have any idea what all those experts cost? I mean, I know it was like
tens of thousands of dollars.
Like 30 years ago, right?
Well, I mean, they were at the time and still now are reasonable costs because the consequences of not having those interventions, scientific interventions, means that the likelihood of a flawed project being permitted is almost guaranteed. At least if you have paid experts, at the minimum, you're going to slow down the process, if not discourage the companies that have junk science to present from withdrawing from the project. So, I mean, the costs were in the tens of thousands of dollars.
I'm all for it. I know it was necessary, and I know it was obviously a successful strategy. I'm just wondering, because I think what a lot of corporations bank on, literally, is for citizens not to have enough money to actively and adequately defend themselves in court.
Part of those costs, though, were not just from the tribes, but from Wisconsin Walleyes, Wisconsin Wildlife Federation. I mean, these were contributions of $2,000, $3,000, $5,000 from individual environmental and sport fishing organizations that paid most of the cost of some of these experts. So it wasn't just the tribes that had the casino revenues.
Al, if the silica dust was listed as a hazardous air pollutant, could people litigate under the Clean Air Act about silica dust from the frac sand mines?
Sure.
So then they could form a group, like you just said, a whole bunch of different disparate groups, and then file a lawsuit with the EPA to enforce the fact that this stuff's in the air out here.
Sure.
How do you think we could get it listed as a hazardous air pollutant? What does the group have to do?
Well, I mean, that's where Dr. Crispin Pierce and his environmental monitoring project comes into play. I mean, he's demonstrating that the size of the particles that are being emitted in these frac sand operations are not being looked at by the DNR. And furthermore, that these are precisely the most dangerous kinds of, the most dangerous sizes of particulate matter that are going to pose a major health hazard.
So now that he's proven that, what can you do with his information? What could a group do with that information as far as...
Well, that's where you have to get, environmental litigators involved to assess what the likelihood of success is and what the best strategies for doing that. Now, I can't,
Right.
give you that.
Okay.
He just got the money and he's using the new machines, the air quality machines, and the sand mines. These old machines, they said weren't doing the correct data. So he just got the new machines and I don't think he's used them that long yet. So maybe he's going to wait until he has enough evidence to...
He's supposed to have one of the studies coming out.
Right. One of them is already in press.
Okay, yeah. I thought it was like the end of this month or something he's going to release a report.
Right.
A lot of it, comes down obviously to federal standards for respiratory crystalline silica and state standards. And we made a big push 2 years ago in Minnesota to get the legislature to order the agencies to create standards for particulate size and how much per square meter, and so forth. And so we're almost there in Minnesota getting a standard. But the standard is only one thing. There's always adherence to the standard, and then there's always a crappy standard that does more harm than good. But in terms of court, I don't know. Respirable silica is so hard because it's definitely damned as a deadly substance by the government, the feds, in the workplace. But the state governments have not been willing at this point, and the people that have the money, except for people like Dr. Pierce, who has a sense of professional dignity and actually knows what he's supposed to be doing. There's no data available, and the companies use that. Say, we in Southeast Minnesota, a lot of our hearings, we talk over and over about the what is it called now? It's the precautionary principle, because when we go to the boards or the councils or the township boards, and we say this, there's a chance that this will damage our well water. There's a chance that it will give our children silicosis after so many years. Blah blah blah. Okay, prove it. They want us to be the experts. Well, we can't prove it because there's not the data. Okay, well it's okay then because we don't know for sure that it's going to kill you. So we keep saying, well, instead of that, what we need is a principle that shows that any government body, it's incumbent upon them to exercise precaution, and so that the onus is on the company to prove that it's completely safe, not on the people to prove that, for beyond a shadow of a doubt that they'll be harmed.
We should have the right to say, you want us to prove that it's harmful. We want you to prove it's not. You're coming into our community.
Right.
We're allowing you to come into mine. You need to adhere to what we want you to do. Now, you don't come here and tell us what we want to do. And that's how it should be, but that's not how it is.
Well, I can't help but think if this was asbestos dust, a bunch of stuff would have been done already because people recognize how harmful asbestos dust is.
Why do they recognize it? The same cycle went on with asbestos, with the companies for decades saying it's no problem. You stupid citizens, you have no standing to do anything about it. And then eventually, when it did, then it's encoded now in law and it's all set. But it took decades and decades.
Yeah, the
But
question
are they
that
similar? Silica dust and asbestos dust are
Very,
similar.
very.
But what
asbestosis
he hasn't been
is
able,
so-
what he's trying to prove, though, is that we know how dangerous the dust is. But what he's got to prove is that in the ambient air in enough quantities to be a danger to us. And if you can prove that, then you've got something to go on. And what he has shown so far is the closer you get to the mines, the higher the levels are. But he needs to prove, I think, beyond a shadow of a doubt, that within a certain range or a certain distance out from the mines, it is unhealthy to breathe. And if it is,
we took readings just over a year ago, January last year, a lot of snow cover in Winona, and Crispin and a couple of us took readings at every, just snapshots, one-day readings at every frac sand operation in the city of Winona, which is 7 for the frac sand mine. And at every one of those, there was, even the ones that were absolutely no activity, they were covered in snow. There was virtually, you wouldn't have thought that there would have been a lot of dust stirred up at all. Those readings were higher there than they were in the rest of the city. So even at that point, the air we were breathing was unhealthy. But like you say, you can think you've proved something, but if the governmental body wants to do something, they will. And if they want to keep you from doing something, they will. That's my experience. We have to keep talking about this precaution thing, I think, because I think it's really important. Because it happened, I've seen it, I've gone through the region, hearing after hearing after hearing. All say this: citizens, you've got to prove it. If you can't, the company's out.
I'm wondering if, and until it can be proved, if we can't make the perception of harm worrisome enough to enough people, and of course I'm thinking about Wisconsin, you'd be thinking Minnesota, but that there would be the momentum built, like for the Crandon mine, for a statewide push for a moratorium. And I'd like, maybe Al, you can tell a little more of your experience with the history of that. Are we anywhere near the tipping point where you think that we can mobilize the population in the population centers in Dane County and Milwaukee, or are they not far enough? Those were all downstream with the Wolf River over there. Over here, it's like words don't even exist. How can we build a momentum?
Yeah, the mining moratorium law would never have been passed. It was simply the people in the local area that were concerned about the issue. The group that opposed the Crandon mine, one of the groups, was the Wolf Watershed Educational Project. And this was a group that brought together about 30 different organizations, tribes, sport fishing organizations, environmental groups. We met in the Wolf River watershed for an entire year, up and down the Wolf River on different reservations in different communities, and we figured out we're going to do a major educational effort in the spring of 1996 called the Clean Water Speaking Tour. And the idea was to go from the headwaters of the Wolf River in Rhinelander, or Crandon rather, all the way down to Green Bay at the discharge point of the Wolf River, talk to every community and present from the point of view of the Native American community, the environmental community, and the sport fishing community, what the problems were of the Crandon project. Before we actually started the speaking tour, because we had made such an issue of the purity of the Wolf River and the contamination that would occur if Exxon discharged its wastewater into the Wolf River, Exxon decided they were going to forego dumping their wastewater into the Wolf River. They're going to build a 38-mile pipeline and transfer the wastewater from the Wolf watershed to the Wisconsin River watershed, because the Wisconsin River was less protected and less valued by the state of Wisconsin than the Wolf River was. And we said, hallelujah. You've just given us an entire new constituency to talk about that brought us not just from northeast Wisconsin, but the entire state. Because at the headwaters of the Wisconsin River, Rhinelander, all the way down to Dane County, you had communities all along the Wisconsin River that were concerned about the discharges into the Wisconsin River. And so we doubled our speaking tour, including both the Wolf River and the Wisconsin River. And in every community that we spoke at, we left behind literature and contact people that either formed chapters of the Wolf Watershed Project or their own local organization. And those communities then became the major organizing vehicles for pressing the legislature to pass the mining moratorium law. Because on its own devices, the legislature said this is a no-go. We will never pass what we consider to be anti-industry legislation. And so all those local groups along the Wisconsin River and the Wolf River met with their local representatives until they got a commitment either to support the mining moratorium or to be on a list of the exceptions, the exceptional legislators that refused to take a position on the mining moratorium. And finally, after two tries in the legislature, 1997 and 1998, on the second time, we got enough votes to pass the mining moratorium legislation. Tommy Thompson, who opposed the legislation from the very beginning, signed the mining moratorium legislation on Earth Day 1998 on the banks of the Wolf River outside of Shawano, Wisconsin. And that became the basis for the...
This is regulatory, though, right? I mean, this is all regulatory.
Yes, it is regulatory.
So how would you relate this to what we can take away from this for community rights?
Whether you say it's regulatory or not, the assumption of both strategies is to not let your strategy be dictated by the limitations of the state that the state imposes on you. Right? The state told us that we will never pass a mining moratorium, that local communities did not have the right to object to whatever the DNR said about the permit process. We ignored all of those restrictions and limitations. We went ahead and said people in local community have the right to have the final say over this project, and whether it be the mining moratorium law or the local agreement law, we defied what the state lawyers and the state regulators told us was possible to do. And only by objecting and only by ignoring what those limitations were we successful in doing
You have
it.
to learn how to be, not to be good children.
Exactly.
You got to be rebels.
Exactly.
Grown-ups.
Now, did that whole process there, did that affect what was going on with the copper mining in this area? Remember when they wanted to do that?
I mean,
Because that was the same time, right? Yes.
After the mining
Yes.
moratorium passed and the Crandon project was dead, Kennecott then decided that western Wisconsin was a new frontier, and they were going to do in western Wisconsin what they were not able to do in Crandon. And the same people that were instrumental in opposing the Crandon project came to all these communities in western Wisconsin and talked about what the experience was in Crandon, convinced the town boards and the county boards that this is a technology which will guarantee your water pollution, both your groundwater and surface water, and furthermore, not be anywhere near an economic boon to the community. And community after community, county after county passed moratoria that effectively told Kennecott, get the hell out of here.
But a moratorium only is a stopgap measure. I mean, it only lasts for so many...
No, it's saying that until you can show that you...
It was an open-ended moratorium.
Yes.
It is.
Wasn't it a 10-year one? I thought it was a 10-year.
They have to prove that
The state one
They have to
was.
show where they mined
for 10
years during mining and 10 years after mining. Because a lot of acid mine drainage does not show up until years after the mine closes, depending on the movement of the groundwater and the hydrology and the geology and the soil, absorption capacity. So not every mine is going to exhibit signs of acid drainage in a specified length of time. And so you have to have this open window of 10 years.
Are you up to date on the very recent, I think, findings or suspicions that there may be acid mine drainage in conjunction with some of these bigger sand mines? I think
Pat Popple has confirmed with the DNR that in many of the places where sand mining is taking place, that there are also sulfide mineralization, and the DNR has documented acid drainage from some of these operations.
So can we put them under that?
Yes.
Yeah.
I mean, this is, one of the unexplored volatile issues in the frac sand mining issue, because we already have, the mining moratorium, which says that whenever you have a sulfide mineralization, you have the possibility of acid drainage, and therefore special precautions need to be taken. And this has not been part of the public discussion of frac sand mining up until this point.
When we were doing that copper mine thing, some people from Trumpeldor County and myself went to the rod and gun clubs. We went to all the rod and gun clubs and talked to them about this, and they were not happy. We were talking about the Trumpeldor River. We were talking, and we got a lot of support from the rod and gun clubs. I mean, we spent months doing that.
I mean, I think this can open up dialogue with a lot of constituencies that are not now either aware of or concerned about frac sand mining.
Right. I mean, they what are you doing here? Especially me, a woman. What are you doing in our Rod and Gun Club meeting, right?
Well, they weren't happy with you.
Well, no, it was just that,
They weren't happy with you.
I mean, this is a long time ago, and
Right.
women did not come to the
Okay.
Rod and Gun Club meetings. I mean, they do now because there's a
Yeah.
lot of women hunters, but then there weren't. And then when I started talking, I had Danny Foote with me, and then when I started talking, they were like, oh, wow, we can't have this. I mean, it was overwhelming.
So you made yourself available as a speaker.
I
to
just
the
asked to be on their programs. I called them up and said, can I come in and talk on your program? And sometimes Danny called because it was easy
So
for Danny to get on the program.
Maybe we should try to get the DNR to include this issue of sulfide drainage in the study. They're currently supposed to be doing a study in the state of
Strategic
Wisconsin.
analysis.
What's it called?
Strategic analysis.
Yeah. And Midwest Environmental Advocates had included this information, I believe, in their proposal. But we should make sure the DNR is looking at that
Right.
and takes that seriously.
Exactly.
It could be instrumental in this.
I wonder if it's worth a push to ask the DNR to put a moratorium on while they're doing this assessment. To me, that's what makes sense. I mean, how can you do an assessment knowing that there's a possibility there could see some bad effects at it, and yet allow mining to still continue in and get permits while you're doing this study that might prove that this is detrimental to our health? You'd think it would be a no-brainer that they put a moratorium along with the assessment, but
Does the
Well,
DNR
the
have that
DNR
authority?
well-
Would it be through the DNR that a moratorium on it would happen, or does that have to come through the legislature?
Well, that's where you need someone, an environmental attorney, to make a judgment about whether the existing mining moratorium law applies to frac sand mining.
The
And
DNR,
of course, in order to do that, you need to get the data from the DNR that has monitored some of these frac sand sites. And I know that Deb Dix, I think, is the DNR person on that. She has admitted that this is a concern.
I just don't have faith in the DNR. They really
Well,
don't have any
no.
power anymore. What do we
It does make a difference whether DNR has power or you have faith in them. What is important is that once you get the data, once you confirm the DNR has this data, then you use that in your own press release and you take that to the public and to these, various conservation, sport fishing organizations, and you create a constituency to put pressure on the legislature and the DNR to do something then. So you don't have to have faith in the DNR.
And we can do our own science. I mean, there's Public Lab or whatever they're called, and other groups that help you to. I mean, we've had to discover our own oil spills north of Winona. The DNR wasn't doing it, the railroad wasn't doing it, or whoever. And we have to sort of take matters into our own hands sometimes.
we had the public lab come down and fly kites with cameras on it over one of our mines so we get better pictures of it. They came down and put kites up in there with cameras on them. It worked pretty good, actually.
How would we how and where would we test? Because we can't test on their property. Are we going to be testing, like if we did test, would we be testing a stream just down road from them? I mean, we have no baseline because it's already started. So I'm just wondering, unless you have a baseline, you take this stream and you take a neighboring stream that's a little further away from where there is no mining.
That's why I think the first thing is to get the data from the DNR. What is the basis for their judgment that this is a problem? And what kind of testing did they do? And that will tell you what kind of testing is appropriate to further document the problem or the extent of the problem.
What you should be doing is looking for an independent engineer that can do some of that stuff, or maybe one or more than one. You might have to have somebody that can do water, you might have somebody that can do soils. But you got to find those engineers and get them in line and have them do baseline testing, if you hear of a mine coming in. And you got to get those people on board and get the board to authorize them to do the inspecting. We're trying to, and the reason why I say independent contractor is we have a problem with Scott McCurdy at Cedar Core Engineering, which is doing an awful lot of the independent work for the towns in the area. And he wrote a letter to the board months ago saying that Cedar Core is now doing work for the mines. And he didn't see that as a conflict of interest. He thought he could still maintain his unbiased work. And And we're going, his unbiased work is biased already, that before they work for the mines. And because he used to tell us that you can't keep the mines out. So you do the best you can to accommodate them and regulate them, which was a bunch of baloney, and we're trying to get the town.
You can get academic help. I mean, is the university system, is that a potential place where people can get experts to help without paying $200,000?
University of Wisconsin Extension has those kind of resources available, and if you've been following the controversy in the last week when the government decided to change the mission of the university from serving the people to serving the corporations, there was a firestorm of criticism that forced the governor to renege on his intention to change the mission of the university from serving the people to serving, private employers.
You guys do wonderful things in Wisconsin.
That helps them in his presidency.
What was it you said is happening that leads to this acid contamination in the streams?
It's the presence of sulfide minerals like pyrite in the ore or the rock, and once those pyrite minerals are exposed to air and water, there's a chemical reaction that creates sulfuric acid. Sulfuric acid then releases other heavy metals in the ore body, and there are 25 heavy metals that get released: copper, zinc, chromium, mercury, into the environment, and those heavy metals are what create biological dead zones.
The people in Minnesota are even the companies that want to do the mining, sulfide mining, are saying, it's going to be in the environment for 500 to 1,000 years at least.
Are you saying that the sulfide would be within the sand?
Yes.
Or
Or is it in the layer?
It's in the geology of the deposit.
Yeah, and they're breaking.
So
above and
when they
below.
blast the hills, they make available these sulfide particles that get into the air and the water, and that creates the acid drainage.
So it's in the limestone above
Yes,
and below.
right.
Maybe some of that could be tested, just even.
I mean, there should be, geological reports about the geology of these limestone deposits, and in those reports, just like we know from the iron ore controversy in northern Wisconsin, it was Wisconsin and federal geological surveys that were done of these rocks in the 1920s and later in the 2000s that identified sulfide mineralization in these geological formations.
Your break is over in just a couple of minutes. You will be joining for the closing circle. Thank you, everybody.
The Ladysmith mine closed, and didn't they give them a certificate of completion?
They were going to until we objected to it because all they did was to reclaim the surface, and this stream that was discharging into the Flambeau River was discharging excessive amounts of copper and zinc. We filed suit against the company for violation of the Clean Water Act, and we won at the district court level. The company appealed it to the appeals court in Chicago, and the appeals court essentially said that because the DNR had allowed that under a different permitting system, that we couldn't sue them.
We're about 5 minutes past.
Okay.
So they got it?
So that the decision was overturned.
How long ago was that?
This was last June.
Really? That just happened?
Yeah.
I hadn't heard what the outcome.
Yeah.
Thanks, Al.
Sure.
My grandson was up there occupying land.